go.
Hello everyone, Danny Chifley here from the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. Thank you so much for your prompt arrival for today's webinar, Station Fundraising During COVID-19. Your questions answered. Before we get started, your webinar today is coming to you from Gadigal land. And so we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, paying respects to elders past, present and emerging. If you'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of your land, please feel free to do so in the instant message box or there on the chat, because we're Facebook Living this session at the moment. As we navigate our way, both as a sector and a society through COVID-19, stations need to maintain fundraising, both as a way of staying on air through uncertain times and assuring also that we're on sound financial footing once we return to normal programming and indeed normal life. Big session for you today. Some great guest presenters. Thank you so much to them for making themselves available. Jason Parker, Chief Media Officer International for Dunham+Company, and Joshua Crowther, who you can see on your screen there at the moment. Josh, I hope I've said your surname correctly. You
actually nailed it. That's very rare, so well done.
What do I usually call you, Crowther?
Crowther. That's the usual, Crowther.
I'm glad you're getting the chance to work with professionals. I'll leave it up to you and Jason to give a bit of a description as to what the Dunham+Company do, but I would very much recommend for all of our participants here today to go and check out their website, Full Service Marketing, Fundraising and Public Relations for not-for-profit and faith-based organisations. Your host for this morning's webinar, and the person to whom you hopefully delivered a few questions, is Andrew Morris, the CBAA Manager of Online Products and Services, and a gentleman who's slowly but surely becoming a real veteran of the webinar scene.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, 2020 has been your year for webinars, and I couldn't think of a better person to be doing those. Now, I am going to get on out of here and let the professionals have a chat. We did sort of ask attendees to send through their questions prior to this, but we will be taking questions on the fly. You'll notice that Zoom gives you the option of instant messaging through the Zoom webinar chat. You can also put questions up in the Q&A. We're going to be dealing with everything as it comes to hand. And for those of us watching this on Facebook Live, we will, of course, field your questions that way. But I will, there we go. I think we've got Jason there on screen as well. This is all fantastic. I'm going to shut up now, leave it to the professionals. Thanks to the Community Media Training Organisation for all of their help. Let's get started with today's webinar.
Well, thank you very much for attending, and it's great to have Jason Parker and Josh Crowther from Dunham+Company joining us today. I guess, yeah, what we're in unique times that we haven't been in before, and stations are feeling pain from loss of sponsorship, possibly impacting membership and fundraising. And so today we want to just look at ways that we can help you with maybe tactics and strategies to help you with your fundraising, to more deeply engage with your donors, and how possibly COVID-19 impacts fundraising. So Jason and Josh, thanks so much for joining us today. And could I maybe start with you, Jason, just to give us a 60-second bio of yourself?
Looks like he's having trouble unmuting. So
I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Yeah, sorry about that.
There you go.
My iPad for some reason was not able to connect on the laptop, so apologies for that. Andrew, hey, yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate the invite, and I love the fact that I get to spend a couple of months a year in Australia serving clients there. So I think for me, it started off in radio a number of years ago, and spent time in the entertainment industry doing marketing and artist development, and had a branding and ad agency. And over the last 10 years or so, I've been with Dunham+Company, and right now serving in the role over media, and have the chance to work with primarily with listener-supported radio stations in the US, UK, New Zealand, and where you guys are in Australia. So enjoy being able to do that, lead the team. We do probably about 100 events or so within a given year. And those are campaigns with appeals. And it's not only fulfilling, but it's great to see when sort of the light bulb goes on and listeners invest in the community station that they're actually really passionate about and they want to keep going. So thanks for, Andrew, I know you're a longtime friend, man, and love the opportunity to be able to do this and hopefully in some way serve the stations and serve CBAA.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. And Josh, tell us a bit about yourself, background.
Yeah, so I've done this work for about 12 years. And when I studied my degree in communication, I thought that I would have to work for a bank for my whole life. And as it turns out, I started my working life in finance just as the GFC hit. And that was a fascinating time. I'll tell you what, we're in some interesting territory right now with this COVID thing. So I then moved into fundraising. I didn't realize it was a thing you could do to raise money for great organizations making a difference in the world. But met Rick Dunham, who employed me at the time, took a chance on a pretty young guy. And I've been here for around 12 years doing this work with over 50 organizations in my time at Dunham. We work with around 15 organizations doing, essentially being the outsourced marketing department. So doing everything that we suggest they do. So I will say today, we're going to be talking strategy. So overall how to plan things out and how to strategize, but just be aware we've also been responsible for doing a lot of this stuff ourselves as well. So we understand it can be painful connecting strategy to actual action. And hopefully we won't suggest anything today that we ourselves haven't had the pain of having to do. So just as background, Jason and I have both been involved in on-air fundraising and multi-channel fundraising for quite some time.
Cool. Well, why don't we start, Josh, with just taking a quick overview. So what we're going to do is just spend a bit of time just talking about some trends and overviews for a few minutes. And then we want to get stuck into your questions because we've got a fair few questions and we'd like to give you some solutions and some advice. So can we start just initially, Josh, with just looking at the current giving trends in Australia and what does it mean for community stations, in April 2020?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and certainly been asked this a number of times. With the context that we're in, where we've had kind of bushfires, floods, and now this pandemic, it's a pretty unique time. There are a number of organisations that have taken financial hits, particularly donated revenue and sponsorship revenue, as you mentioned earlier. But the one thing I will say is that those who have pivoted and communicating effectively at this time have actually seen increases in their fundraising income. So to give you an example of that, the organizations we're working with now, on average, are about 20% up in March compared to the previous year's March. And so there is a good rationale to say when people are communicated to effectively and the message is appropriate, people understand that great community organizations need support. In fact, the context gives the believability. And in Australia, the number one driver of all giving is that believability. So if you're familiar with the Aristotelian model of persuasion, how we get anyone to do anything, as Aristotle said it, you've got those three drivers, one being emotion, like tell a story, get me to cry, and then I'll give. The second thing is like logic, so it's got to make logical sense. And the third thing is that believability, like do I trust the people who are sending the message? In Australia, overwhelmingly, people say trust is the biggest factor for their giving. And look, in America, sorry, Jason, but if you make someone cry, they'll give. And in the UK, actually, interestingly, if there's no logic to it, they will never give. And so we see different things play out in different contexts. But for Australia right now, you've got the believability because if they're active participants in your community station, if they listen actively, then they get it. They understand that you'll be under pressure. And there's the believability factor is covered in that. And so the question really is, how do you communicate effectively? And when you do, you can expect there will be a decent bump in revenue. Now, long term, there will be some economic effects of this that will be beyond the current crisis. So particularly if you're at all reliant upon significant giving, so major donors and others who give large sums of money based on their profits through particularly things like the stock market right now, they're going to be in a position where it will be difficult to give those large cash gifts. And so you just have to know your donors. In fact, the number one thing we're suggesting right now in Australia is to contact all your supporters. If you can do that, just as a really practical thing you can do, it's to make sure you give them, if you have their phone numbers, give them a call and see how's this affected them. Because at the end of the day, you are all community broadcasters, and so you've got your own community. You know who they are. You know who your members are, and caring for them well during this time will bode well for you in the future. But it also allows you to build community and connect them in with the broader thing that's happening. So in those conversations that you have one-on-one with those members, supporters, you can absolutely make it clear that you're thinking of them and that they're connected to the community, but also that others have had to pull back. And at the time where others have had to pull back, they can be someone who steps forward and fills the gap for anyone who's lost their job, anyone who is hit by this crisis harder. And again, that's just a really simple way of connecting all of your supporters back in. And when you do that, we have seen great success in increasing income year on year. And again, I would encourage anyone who is thinking about pulling their fundraising or stopping communicating at all about the financial needs of your organization to reconsider that decision. Because at this time, people get it. They understand that you have financial needs and that your other streams of revenue may have dried up. So that's something you absolutely have to communicate effectively and be sensitive to people's own situations. But doing that will actually lead to increase. So that's what we're seeing, Andrew. And I'd love to hear people's questions because I know that may seem counterintuitive at this time.
Okay, so we'll come back to that, and we'll talk about about being quite honest with your audience and your listeners, and saying if you are financially doing it tough at this stage, to be honest in your communications and say this is the problem, and understand that your supporters love your station, and if they're engaged, they'll want to get behind it. That's pretty much what you're saying, and we'll talk about how to do that a little later. So, Jason, can we talk about current listening trends? I've read people like James Cridland saying, you could expect possible changes in your listenership because people aren't in cars. But then I'm seeing Southern Cross Media, which is the Today Network, saying they're having booming online streaming listening and podcasting is up. Could you give us a picture of how possibly listener habits are changing now with, isolation?
Yeah, I don't want to be Captain Obvious in this, right? I mean, because everybody knows that patterns are disrupted. We don't have the kind of in-car listening. I get the chance to work with executive directors, CEOs, content directors, just talking through what's currently happening is, and for most, surveys are either paused or here in the US, we're waiting on Nielsen data for March, which is still a couple of weeks away. And, the engagement is strong. The perception is that terrestrial listening is down. And we've had some stations that have definitely had an uptick in their streaming, and that has mostly been for those who have done a great job pre-crisis of making it really clear how easy it is and where you can stream their station. So I think once we get a few more data points including the Nielsen data here, I think we'll have a better picture of it. But I think it's kind of there's a massive pattern disruption. So we're all sequestered in our houses and not in our cars, what we would normally do. But if there's anything I would encourage is if you are already communicating and engaging with your audience as to how and where they can stream using all of your channels, including on air, then kudos to you. If you're not doing that, it's not too late. Start tomorrow. Start tomorrow with anyone who is live on the air, and start developing ways in which you can use imaging and other content points, both on the air and off the air, to be able to do that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we'll put some questions out now for you guys, and we might come back to why listeners of radio stations actually support their radio stations. But first, a question from 2SER is, should we bring our major station fundraising drive forward from late 2020 because there's an expectation the public will have donation fatigue or a lack of discretionary spending funds?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I know Josh has got some viewpoints on that as well. I think, first of all, just want to start with generally our recommendation, just based upon before the COVID-19 crisis, before all of the pattern disruptions. Our general recommendation to community-supported stations is to fundraise more often. So that means if you typically do an annual appeal, do more than one appeal a year. And that's not from a how can we wear the audience out? How can we ask for more? It is incredibly difficult to grab the listener's attention just once. I mean, I think you know from running promotions that probably used to take 3 or 4 weeks to actually reach your entire audience. It's taken even more time to grab their attention once. And so our recommendation continues to be that you should fundraise more frequently, and do so with a lot of creativity. And I know that some of the community stations, Andrew, the one that you mentioned in particular, is using creativity to be able to engage and share what the need is. But that's generally our recommendation, is to do shorter appeals with greater frequency throughout the year. And I think in this season, it really comes down to, so what's your financial need? So if you're, I kind of throw it into probably 3 different buckets. One is, hey, everything's good and you don't need to fundraise. Monthly support is there, donations are coming in, your sponsorships are great. But that's pretty much not anybody at this point. Most are living in one of these 2, which is there's a funding gap, meaning there's a budget shortfall due to the downturn in events and sponsorship and maybe even donations. And so if that's the case, then consider moving your event forward, or better yet, do an event now and do an event later. And that goes back to the first point I made. And then, Andrew, the third bucket, which some are in right now because of a variety of reasons, including sponsorship and event revenue downturn, is there's actually an emergency funding need right now to keep operating, to actually operate at the level that the audience, your fan base, expects. And if that's the case, then would say, again, don't move your fundraiser from where it was. Actually do a fundraiser now if you have a need and you can present that need to the audience.
Okay, so I mean, I know often with community radio, and we did it at our station as well, we were hesitant to always ask our listeners for support and ask them to give to their station. So we sort of make our mind up sometimes that the listeners will not want to support our station. And yet some people may have lost jobs. Some people will be doing it hard. But I guess, what's your research, what's your history tell you about listeners who love their station and supporting their station?
Well, I think if there is a hesitancy and a concern about fundraising, then I think that's well placed. I don't think it's a hey, let's just be oblivious and run straight into something. If you are relevant and you're not having a disconnect with where the audience is, because quite frankly, they're just like you. They're having the same struggles that you're having. They're having the same concerns. They're going stir crazy, being stuck at home. What all the things that you're experiencing, including the financial part, they're experiencing that too. So again, I think it goes full circle into something that Josh mentioned earlier, is you have super fans who want their station to continue, and they actually have the capacity to be able to do that. And they just want to know that there's a need and that there's an opportunity for them to get involved and to make sure that your station and the mission that you are about will continue.
Okay. Yeah, 60% is over 60% of supporters, and this is recent research that just got released by the Communities Forum. About 64% of donors will only give when there's a need, and when they're presented a need. Not even when there's a need, when they're presented a compelling need, which tells me something. It tells me that donors only give if there's a need. And the great news is we have a baked-in need right now that everybody is aware of. You don't have to do the heavy lift on, look, COVID-19, it's really affecting everyone, because they know it, they're living it, it's their reality. And ultimately, fundraising has to be relevant to that individual first. And so the impact on my life is one of those key motivators for giving. Now, it also may affect, my community more broadly, and that's a message you can absolutely deliver with the community stations that you're all a part of, because there is a broader community impact you have. But it starts with the impact to me as an individual. And at the end of the day, if you're asking questions like, oh, we shouldn't be insensitive, then I would absolutely agree. You shouldn't be insensitive, but also don't take them out of the decision-making process. So if you're going to cut something critical to them, or if you're going to stop broadcasting, or if whatever that looks like, you better tell the people that absolutely love what you do first, before you take that out of their hands. And so why I really started with the build relationships with your super fans, with the people that are already subscribers, build relationship with them, but probably more importantly, get to know them in what situations they're in, because you will find as you call and you have those conversations, and again, that's something that your volunteer base can absolutely do, but as you have those conversations with them, you'll find that there are some that have gone, yeah, I've lost everything. I've lost all my income. I've lost everything. But there'll be others that say, I'm doing actually pretty well. And I was talking to an organization the other week, and there was a carrot farmer who had seen profits for them increase by 30%. For some reason, people have started hoarding carrots. But it's one of those things like, oh, they had the capacity to give more in that instance, whereas previously maybe they weren't able to, but because people have decided to hoard carrots, great. Well, there's people benefiting from that, and I know that's a wild example, but it's one example of where not everyone is in the same boat, and you should know of your audience, not everyone's coming from the same place. There's some who have absolutely been devastatingly affected, and they don't have the capacity to give, and they won't have the capacity to give. But it's for those people that you ask, because they haven't got the ability to give, and yet they still love to listen. They love to be a part of the community, and they don't want that to go away, but they don't have the capacity to give. So really what we're saying is, for the people who do have the capacity to give at a crisis time like this, would they step forward? Would they give at a time like this? And I know some stations certainly have never done anything like this before, never even raised money on air. That's not been a traditional thing that you've done, but you probably do have some good relationships with your listeners, and you probably know some of them. So it's probably worth, even for those who don't do on-air fundraising, to reach out to those members and those subscribers who have engaged with you in the past, just to see how they're going, and to let them know that here are the financial needs. And whether that's done in ideally in a phone call or a Zoom meeting where they're that way inclined or that way able, then it's a great way just to connect with your listeners one-on-one. So even at a very small scale, even for many of you who operate in regional markets where you know that who are the people who are engaged in the past, and you may have done fundraising, via events and that's been your primary source of revenue. Well, even for those stations in that situation, it would be worthwhile considering who do we know, who do we have a relationship with, and how can we at least know where they're at, and make those relational connections where we can, because those all fundraising is, again, because it's based on trust, is based on relational trust. And so if you can build up that relational trust at this time, literally with a phone call, and if not a phone call, then even with your broadcast, how are you connecting people through that broadcast? Not all about the financial need. This is about connecting your community in. Certainly there is a financial aspect to this and a financial reality. You may need the $10,000 to continue to broadcast in the way that you have before. So that's going to be a factor in the communication. But more importantly, it's how do we come together as a community in order to see this thing continue, but also connect you in with others that are doing it tough and they can't give right now, but you can do something great. The psychology of giving, just so everyone is aware, when we ask for donations and people respond, what psychologically what happens in someone's mind is they're released from anxiety. It's one of the key benefits of giving psychologically. So they've done brain scans on people, those who give actively and those who don't, and it turns out that giving is very good for your health. And very good for your mental health. And so at a time like this, if you're worried about putting pressure on people, I totally understand that, and that's why we've got to do any sort of fundraising in a really appropriate way. But also know that when people give, it's good for them. It's really, really good for them to give, not only for themselves, but also to see their community connected into what you do. So I just want to encourage everyone, if you're feeling like you're a burden on people, the exact opposite is true of those who give. It just is. And that is what we know from the art and science of giving.
Cool. Nikki from FBI has got a question about, have you got any examples, Jason or Josh, of organizations that are using strong messaging or calls to action during the crisis so far?
Yeah, for sure. It is one of those, kind of goes back to what the level of need is and the transparency and just being really honest with your audience as to what the financial need is. We just wrapped up an appeal in the UK with a client, and it was coming up to the end of their financial year. And there was for a variety of reasons leading up to that moment, mostly with the lockdown that was happening with COVID-19. There was a shortfall, and for them to be funded, they let the audience know what that need was. And again, it wasn't tone deaf. It was very relatable. And it spoke to their audience in a way that was aspirational, was very genuine, and was very, very much straightforward. So I think that as you kind of look at where you are financially right now, and obviously, the end of the financial year coming up June 30th, be honest with your audience and be honest with your staff and talk through what your options are, to Josh's point of getting funded. And maybe that does include an appeal, as it did for our client in the UK. Coincidentally, so with lockdown, with everything that was going on, they raised more money in 5 days than they had ever raised in the history of their organization. So just repeat that one more time. So with lockdown, with the facility basically all but shut down, their broadcast facility, they had an outpouring from their audience when the need was presented, and there was no manipulation involved, when the need was presented and the audience had the chance to respond. And I think that's something we should be reminded of as we go into the latter part of this conversation today, and even what your next steps are. look at what your need is and give the audience a chance to rally around their favorite station to actually keep it going.
Cool. For stations that are quite small, who really haven't, who may rely on sponsorship, Jason asks, their major source of funding has been Sausage Sizzles and Bingo, and both are gone. Plus, many of their presenters are elderly and won't come to the station at this time. So there's a few things holding, there's only a few of them holding things together. What suggestions would you have for small stations who have relied on maybe event-based fundraising? What would be some suggestions, some easy wins for these stations at the moment?
Yeah, let me jump in here because I think this comes back to relationship and being a tight-knit community like that. You would probably be familiar with the, I'm going to say it's an old hat term, that the telephone tree. But the idea that you've got a network of people, it was before social media, we had the telephone tree, right? Where you knew if you told one person that they would tell all of their friends, and no matter if that was good for them to do or not, they would do it anyway. And so you've got those people within your network right now, and those people who used to present and can't come in anymore, particularly those elderly people who are worried about health, which is, you know, fair enough in the current environment. For them, how do you activate them with their own networks? How do they make those calls out to people they'd normally be broadcasting to, but they know? So how can you equip each individual who's engaged with your station in a broadcast capacity and even in a volunteer capacity? How do you activate the telephone tree at this point? And just equip, you know, simply equip them to talk to people, ask them how they're going, how they can support each other. And in doing so, put that compelling message out there that, hey, did you know, I'm even something simple like, I can't be on the air at the moment, but they're still holding the fort. And here's the reality of that. Here's the financial need behind that. And it turns out, you know, old mate who was given $800 a month just so that we could continue to broadcast, well, he's in a dire straits right now. And so someone's got to fill the gap. You know, is there anything you guys could do? How are you guys going? And again, seeing the community activated in that way, that's one of the greatest strengths of having a tight network, is that you absolutely can activate, again, fundraising, relationship, they're deeply tied together. So how can you activate the relationships that are in your network? And that would be one great way of doing so. Just activating the people who have previously been on air.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, Andrew. I mean, it's depending upon where you're at, and we serve stations in small markets, and we serve stations in large markets, and there are commonalities to the need, and the idea of safety and inability to have certain team members who are at higher risk based upon what's going on right now. They're all trying to find creative ways to engage and to, in essence, work around that. And to Josh's point, some of that is what might be considered old school, but is still very relevant. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes intentionality. But it does work because it comes back full circle to if you have a strong base of super fans that want to keep your station going, let them know that there's a need and how they can get involved to be able to meet the need.
And I think there's a role for boards as well, isn't there, guys? Obviously, board members have got a network of friends, a network of relationships where they can stand up and actually get involved and take the lead also in supporting their community station.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if they haven't already activated in that way, this is a great way to get them activated on something that may be a long-term play for you too. So, I mean, the great thing is, they say never waste a crisis. Well, this is a good example of, you know, getting some behavior started within your organization where that telephone tree is activated or the board is activated to ask for that financial need. And then, you know, come this time next year, guess what? It's not as if you haven't done it before. Let's get on with it. So it can be a fun way just to get started, because in the end of the day, it's a low risk situation because the need is so apparent and you don't have to do the heavy lifting on that. I will say, in terms of messaging, the best messaging I have seen has acknowledged the current situation first. So whenever you are communicating to supporters, communicate to them not as if they're a mass blob, but they are. It's Jason that I am talking to directly, and then think, okay, so for Jason, I don't know exactly where Jason's up to right now, but I know there's been some impact to Jason's life, and so when I craft that message to all my supporters, and you can do that in a number of ways, whether it's email or direct postal mail. By the way, postal mail is one of those things you don't want to overlook right now. Going out to the post box has become a real event for people. I know that people are dressing up now just to get their mail. But they're looking at what's in their mail. So don't overlook that as a channel. Even though I know traditionally broadcast is what most of you guys have done in the past, direct mail is a fun little addition there. But in crafting that message, it is acknowledging the need first of the individual. So it's you. We know that you've been disrupted by this pandemic, and just know that if there's anything that's happened, in your life, that we're here for you as a community, and we want to say we're going to continue to do what we do because we know that you care, and even do things like leave your number so they can get in touch if they need to call someone or talk to someone. And that's something that you can facilitate through your network of volunteers, then that's a great thing to do. And then you can unpack, once you've acknowledged where they're at, then you can unpack, well, here's the financial reality for what you love. Now, it's never about the station. It's never about the organization. So donors don't care about your organization. They don't care about the structure of it. They don't care about your newest photocopier. What they care about is the impact on them personally and the great things they get themselves, and then for their wider community, because there's naturally parts of someone that is philanthropic in nature. So, but what is it in for me, and what will I lose here? Well, unpacking that financial situation and directly tying that to what does that mean for me as a listener, and it may mean some pretty significant things if those shortfalls aren't met at this time. And so unpacking that for them, and then giving them the rationale behind why that you're asking them directly to do it. So there's others who have had to pull back. So the justification could be around sponsorship. It could be around other donors who have lost their jobs. Something that gives them the context of, oh, I get it. This is why you're asking me to step forward if I have the capacity to. So landing it there on a call to action that is quite clear, and is in nature compelling because you've unpacked the rationale for them. I wouldn't be hesitant to share stories of people as well if they give you permission to share stories of other people who are loving what you do, loving your broadcast, and are connected to your community. The story is still an absolute essential part of this, and it's for people like that have been so connected into this community at a time of great crisis that we exist. That's why we exist as a community station, because we love it, and we love to be connected to you and people like that. And that's why we're asking you to step forward when they can't. So as a simple bundle of messaging, I would say use all the channels you can, including social media. I know people are streaming this on Facebook right now. Don't be afraid to put out a video on, and stream it direct to social. Have an email that goes out, or a number of emails that go out. Have a direct mail piece that goes out, and don't neglect the broadcast as well, because although listening is disrupted, what you might find is something you normally ran in a day needs to now be a week, as Jason was saying before, or something that was a week now may need to be a month long. And that doesn't mean you're going to do an extreme, full tilt ask for a whole month. But it does probably mean that the messaging and the sweeps that you're doing will probably have to last for longer, because people are jumping in the car at different times, or their listening habits at least have been disrupted.
Cool. You said
Andrew, just building on that just really quick, and I know we're short on time. I think this goes back to a conversation that we had last week, which is, it is how are we moving, and oftentimes it takes certain moments for it to be a catalyst for change. And that may be what's happening in your organization right now. It's because there is a great need, and there is not the revenue from the sources in which you have been accustomed over years and years and years to be able to meet the financial need of your organization. So I think it's also an opportunity to continue, as Josh mentioned, and maybe just look at it this way. Yes, it's not about your organization, because that is an inside out viewpoint. You're not talking about what we're doing and how great we are or our need. You're talking about your opportunity from an outside in, the listener's perspective of what your community station is doing, whether it's large or it's small. And so I think this is an opportunity to not only look at your funding sources and see this as an opportunity in the midst of the storm, but to also look at how you're actually communicating to your audience as a whole, and more specifically your donors, and to ensure that you're looking at it and you're communicating in a language that's outside in, that's all about the listener and placing them first.
And yes, that was the point I was going to mention. It's about making the listener the hero of the story, isn't it? So we're saying that we're a listener-supported community radio station. It's all about community. So we're bringing the listener, making them the central part of being the support. It's about them supporting something that they believe in, that they enjoy, and getting them involved, and talking a lot less about we and the organization and more about the listener, and seeing the outcomes, whether it's you're an arts or a youth station, that you're supporting the best art in this city or the best music in this city. You're keeping that culture of youth alive in this city. Or if you're a regional station, that you're the touchstone, you're the touch point for that community, and that's why you're needed, whether you're in Tamworth or in Warrnambool, whatever. Okay, so guys, we've got a question from Gemma from 3RRR. It's a series of points that she's asking. So I'll start with this. How do we make the most out of our existing subscriber base by targeting specific segments of subscribers? So, for example, encouraging first-time subscribers to the station to renew again the following year, reaching out to people whose subscriptions have lapsed for 3 years. We'll start with those kind of questions, those 2 points, and we can ask some more later.
Yeah, I think just to start with, the idea of a subscriber or someone who has put up their hand and said, I love what you do and I want to subscribe to it. And so just as a base premise, I would consider them to be a donor to the station. They're a supporter to the station. And so I think the base premise probably comes back to that same messaging package that I talked about before, where I would go far and wide. In a situation like this, go as far and wide as you can, because the reality is, for every person that can step forward and give, there's going to be another person that has to step back. And so going to those lapsed segments and unpacking that same messaging platform, so that same, we know that you may be doing it tough right now, having the implications for the station, your station, the station you love that's doing this work in the community. And then the final piece being, so you might be able to step forward and give a special gift or renew your subscription, because that enables us to continue to do the work that we do. Now, just as a question here, I would throw it out and over to those who do subscription models. Sometimes it is more simple just to say whatever you can give in order to stand in the place, because those who have already subscribed, the question for them would be, not only can they renew their subscription, but can they press forward and give above that to give others the opportunity who can't afford their subscription right now. And so part of that is, what can they, because again, the idea behind what I'm purchasing and what I'm giving, they're 2 different mentalities. We've done trials and tests over the years where we've done direct sales of things, so sales of books or sales of whatever it is, and charged a certain amount. And then we've tested that head-to-head against asking someone to give a gift of any amount, and then they get that free thing, that free book, or that free incentive, whatever it looks like. And by far and away, every time, the gift of any amount always comes back higher than the purchase amount of that particular thing. So just considering that language, how do we incentivize people to give what they can. And we don't want to set it at a certain amount because some people can't afford that. And then there'll be others that could do 10 times that easily. Because if it's something that they love, then it's something they'll give to the extent that their capacity allows. We never want to pull that down. And so that's all I would say on that subscription model is it's probably the same package at this time. The segmentation still has to be appropriate because if someone's a current subscriber, you don't want to, you probably don't want to say renew your subscription if they've paid up for 12 months. But I would want to go to the whole audience and ask what they can do at this time, because it is a pretty unique situation.
Hey, Andrew, kind of on that point too, the flexibility to give how I'm able to, and to make that whole process as easy and crystal clear as possible. And by flexibility, I mean most offer exclusively the opportunity for a one-off gift. Well, based upon our research and based upon current market conditions, the ability to break that up as a monthly installment, to break that up to make it work within their budget, they may be able to give you the same amount that they have committed to as a one-off gift in previous years. They may be able to do that over time if you're able to give them the option of giving monthly. And so I think something to consider as well, you're being as flexible as possible. And I know for all the participants, both at home and within your organization, you've been tightening your belts and you've been finding ways in which you can save money and you can be as efficient as you can possibly be. Well, within that, let's give listeners the option to give, but let them choose as a one-off or to give monthly. So that's a real encouragement. And I know that could be a systems change and a massive process change for many organizations. And for some, it just may not be possible based upon the limitations you have. But would really consider that, because that is placing, it goes back to that outside in viewpoint, right? You're placing your listener first and giving them every opportunity you possibly can for them to financially support your community station.
Cool. Gemma's got some questions about thanking. So we're talking a lot about asking support at this time, obviously, but the other part of asking is thanking, and then also reporting on how their gift has made an impact at your radio station or through your radio station to listeners and stuff. So Gemma's asking just about, I guess, communications, written or email. She's been thinking about doing a yearly or biannual subscriber letter to go out to current subscribers and recent donors, including a rundown of what's happening at the station in terms of current and future projects. She doesn't normally communicate that often. So she's just wondering your thoughts on comms. It's not often to send those communications out to listeners to report back and to thank.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And let me say, in terms of retention of donor relationships, supporter relationships, the holy grail really is retention. So although we may be able to do a broadcast and get a bunch of people to give a one-off gift, the real key is how long can we retain those relationships for? And so the kind of communication that she's talking about there is essentially what I would call retention activity. It's how do we keep them engaged and part of this community? Because the reality is, for every person who first engages with you, only about, if you're doing a fantastic job of communicating, that only about 40% of them will re-up and renew in following years. And so that's what we know of the benchmarks. And so compare that to someone who's been supporting you for 3 years. Now, the likelihood of them dropping off, the game completely flips. So you're looking at only 10% dropping off. If they've been there for 3 years and there's a group of your absolute red hot core supporters, only about 10% of them drop off. And normally they're dropping off because their financial situation's changed or they've moved or whatever that looks like. And so if you can do anything to keep them engaged from that first time they decide to give a gift or subscribe, if there's anything you can do to keep them engaged, you know that there's a huge return on investment there for you. So the other thing to note is if you're only ever doing annual drives, if they miss next year's annual drive, and this comes back to Jason's point as to why we would do more frequent on-air appeals, but in general, more frequent communication, is because if they miss that, that's it. We no longer get to retain them. In fact, we've done a numbers analysis of those who've done just annual appeals versus those who have done multiple in a year. And those who do multiple in a year, although it seems counterintuitive, they have much higher levels of core support. So those who have been with them for the long term, compared to those who only do those one-off appeals, who tend to see more income from just those kind of one donation and then they're out types of donors. And so what I would say is building that group of core donors is what will sustain you the next time a crisis comes, because those core supporters you can rely upon even in a crisis like this, where it completely wipes away most giving. Is what you'll find is that because you're number one or number two in their philanthropic giving mix, that they will still prioritize giving to you, even if that average gift has gone down. And what I will say in this crisis, although those organizations have been 20% up in revenue and gifts, they are down in average gift because many major donors or significant donors who have given more are no longer able to. So I will say that there is an average gift issue right now, but that's naturally because of the season we're in.
Cool.
Hey, Andrew, too, just on that point, I think it's great to leverage direct mail, email, all the communication channels that you can, and being able to thank with greater frequency. I also think it's an opportunity on air to thank as well, and that can be through a spotlight of a listener who is also donating. That could be as simple as one of your presenters highlighting how awesome, and however you want to brand that, just how awesome Jennifer is, and that she has been keeping the station on the air for the last 8 years, and like celebrate your listeners on the air and model the behavior that is actually not only representative of those who are sold out as super fans of your station, but model that behavior of gratitude that's actually coming from your presenters across each one of your day parts. No matter what size your station is, big and small, the opportunity to thank on the air in a very creative way that is connected to your brand and connected to your mission. If you're not doing that now, or if you are doing that, it's a time to increase the frequency. Cool.
Let's say we've got around 5-10 minutes left. So why don't we talk, because you've just mentioned on air, Jason, I would really, because I know that a number of appeals are either on air now or coming up, and we are leading up to June. Can we talk about some on-air stuff, particularly with maybe presenters and some practical tips on when you open that microphone during an appeal, how not to stuff it up, but how to focus on what you're doing. So it's an appeal, you're on air, you're asking for people to support your station, or for them to come through and support their station. Can we talk about what a break would look like? So it's a music show. There's 4 breaks in the hour. How would we structure a break to present an opportunity for listeners to support their station? So what does a break look like during an appeal? One that's going to be effective.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we have the opportunity, as you can imagine, we are not on the air in Australia, but we have the privilege of being able to coach some great talent and some great presenters. At the same time, I think each one of those presenters would tell you that they are on a journey. They're on a journey to be able to conversationally, in the same style in which they normally connect to their audience, actually communicate what the opportunity is and how to get involved to meet a need. And so, first of all, just looking at your clock, and this is all back to the frequency thing, we recommend, with few exceptions, actually presenting the opportunity, if you're a music-based format, after every song. And I know that may seem daunting and overwhelming, but that's what it actually takes based upon what we know and how the audience actually consumes your product. You've got a very finite window to be able to grab their attention. So Andrew, typically, as you would with any great break on the air, you've got, since the attention span is that of a goldfish, you've got about 5 to 7 seconds to actually grab my attention, and engage me in a relevant way. In this season, that could be a little bit different than it normally would be prior to this crisis. But grab my attention, and let me know next what it is that is so awesome about the opportunity to actually give, to donate, and don't be bashful about it, or don't be embarrassed by it. And we use the word opportunity over and over and over again because it really is. That's how your listeners view it. Your presenters, on the other hand, may view it as you've just offered the opportunity for me to do an appeal break, which is equivalent to some level of torture, and I don't like it. And that's understandable, but that's the journey that we are on with the presenters that we coach and produce during appeals. Is if you're excited about it, just like you would be excited about a concert or an event or bingo night or whatever it might be, you have to come into it with the same level of passion and excitement, and knowing that the listener views it as an opportunity. Giving stories, I know that Andrew, Josh mentioned this earlier. If you've got stories of how the station and lines up with the mission, how others actually love not only listening, but supporting. Use examples of those who have shared their comments of why they actually give. And one of the things that we call positive peer pressure, and this is in no way manipulative, it's actually modeling through those thank yous and through those stories why people just like you choose to give. And then make the opportunity to give unbelievably clear, concise, and easy before you start that next song or before you start that next element. Let them know that it's super simple and secure on your website to give. Let them know that it is an awesome opportunity to talk to a volunteer who would love to speak to them, and let them know what most are actually giving. And if you've got certain levels of giving, whether that's subscribers or whatever you may call them, let them know what that looks like, and then give them the opportunity in a recap at the very end. Give them an opportunity to give by summarizing everything in a line or two of what the opportunity to give is, the fact that your support is actually going to keep the station on the air, and what most people are giving. And I think with repetition, you're going to find presenters who are more excited over time. Some will never be excited, but they'll do it anyway. And you'll also find with the frequency and the clarity within a break that you're going to get more response, because I actually understand why you need me, what my support does, and how I can get involved right now.
Yeah, it's really good. And just to point out a couple of things that Jason has alluded to there, your presenters will hate this unless you address that first. And so before you get started on air, absolutely have like a round table where you can literally put all of those stories that you've collected, ideally, or better still, get them to go and talk to people who have become subscribers and get them to ask the question, hey, why do you subscribe, or why do you give? And that alone should shift some of their perspective. Because what you need to do is shift that perspective before they go and ask, because otherwise there will be a naturally a disjointed nature. Like, oh, will you give to my salary, and I'm really worth it, and it can go pear-shaped unless they understand what they're really asking for is on behalf of that listener. And at this time, not everyone has the ability to give, but for those who do, here's why they give. And so this is what they value, and therefore let's focus our ask around what people are actually valuing here. And so again, that boot camp or that like day before you go on air to ask, definitely worth getting some of those stories on the table. That getting to the why. So I don't know if you've distributed this ever, but the Simon Sinek, the importance of the why. That is a cracking video that's definitely worth watching. And for all your on-air talent to watch that and go, okay, so I've got to communicate from the inside out, the why first, before I can communicate, well, how do we do that, or what exactly do we do? And honestly, very rarely do we get to the what. More often than not, we're focused on the why. And again, your presenters need to know that before they go in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason and Josh. We're pretty much out of time. I would say if you've never done fundraising or you haven't really full on given it a go, I would say nothing else beats bringing your listeners in and getting them to get behind your radio station financially, because it builds such amazing relationships. I think as radio staff, volunteers, or board members, it builds such a strong community, and it is hard work and it can be nerve-wracking, but I think it's one of the most rewarding things as a community radio station to get deep involvement with your supporters. I think it's a really exciting thing. And if there is a silver lining in this situation at the moment, is that you might give fundraising a serious consideration, or if you're already doing it, to up it and to even go further and more deeply engage, to ask, to thank, and to report back to your supporters what the difference and the impact they're making through your radio station, whether it's in a cap city or a regional area. And obviously market size has an impact on how much funding can happen, but and so we understand that. But I hope there was some really good insights that you received over the past 60 minutes. This will be available to download and rewatch. And I will shoot some questions to Jason and Josh if we haven't got back to them. And maybe, hopefully, I'm sure that they'll be able to give us some responses to some of your questions if we've run out of time. But guys, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. It's really been great having your insights and expertise.
It's been great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks to Danny, and a special thanks to Michaela, who lent me her name there for the first part of the webinar. So thank you for that.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We've got all the questions listed there. If we missed anything and you want to find out anything more, please, we will be more than happy to follow up with you post this webinar. I've just put my email address there into the chat box if you want to contact me directly. Andrew Morris, I'm sure, will be able to put his email address in there, and it is, of course, there on the page for this website. We'll be hosting the video shortly after this happens. Our next webinar, the next in our series of sessions where we're looking at how we deal with COVID-19. Governance, COVID-19, impact on boards and directors. That's happening at 11 a.m. 16 April 2020. Registrations are available now. Just go to cbaa.org.au/webinars, or you can link there pretty quickly from the homepage. We're going to be looking at what regulators are doing to support us with governance, how this is going to be different in each state and territory, how we can still meet and make decisions and hold our AGMs. And we'll also be, of course, taking many questions for governance-related questions. This is going to be presented by Patrick Moriarty from the Institute of Company Directors Australia. It's wonderful to have Patrick on hand. He's led the development of that organisation's training arm, delivering training throughout the country to more than 50,000 organisations. Patrick's reputation as a practical and passionate advisor is unparalleled, so he'll be an excellent person to follow up all the knowledge that Joshua, Jason and Andrew have bestowed upon us. So thanks so much, everyone. And one last bit of, I guess it's possibly going to be considered shameless self-promotion. The CMTO and SYN Media, with the support of the CBAA, are going to be holding a community media trivia night tonight. if people want to get involved in that. If you want to sort of take your focus away from all of the heavy stuff that we're routinely discussing, why not join us for a night of trivia? I'm going to be hosting it. Don't let that put you off. It's the natural progression. Couldn't get a radio show, so I thought I'll host the community media trivia night. Just go to the CMTO Facebook or the CBAA Facebook if you want to sign up for that one. On behalf of our good friends at the CMTO, and of course, Andrew, Joshua, and Jason, thank you so much for joining us here for today's CBAA webinar. We'll be seeing you in just a little while. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Take care now. Bye.